Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Trivial Objections. I'm your host, Jared, and today we've got a new topic and some new guests. We have one returning. Johnny is back for another episode. I think the last time we did an episode, we talked about drugs, so it's been a couple of episodes for John, but we've got a couple of new people. One is actually my brother. Jameson, why don't you go ahead and just tell us what you do and, one fun fact.
Cool. Yeah. Well, as Jared said, I'm his brother. Let's see, I'm 26. Put some context. I'm actually a stockbroker for TD Ameritrade. I'm on the trade desk in St. Louis. So, yeah.
All right.
Fun fact. Man, what a terrible suggestion by the
Yeah,
host.
that really puts him on the spot.
Yeah, a fun fact. I don't have a fun fact, so
Okay.
thanks for putting me on the spot there.
All right, awesome.
Appreciate
And
it.
then our second new guest is Carson. Why don't you tell us what you do, and if you want to do a fun fact, you can. If not, it's fine.
So, 30 years old, born and raised in small town USA, primarily a commercial lender for the same community bank that John works for. Been there going on 8 years now.
Cool, awesome. Okay, so the reason I brought you guys on, and the topic for this week is going to be the student loan crisis. And I would say we would all agree it's probably a crisis at this point. And so you guys are you're experts in either finances or money. So I thought you guys would be a really good resource. But would we all agree that this is probably at this point a crisis? Would you guys agree with that?
Definitely.
Yeah,
For
100%.
sure.
I think it's holding back a lot of the young people in our country.
Yeah, just like to piggyback off that, it's probably a problem that's been accumulating for a couple of decades now. And like what Carson said, it's affecting the young people who, are in the prime of their lives, crippled by this debt, who are in the height of their entrepreneurial prime, if you would, in their mid-20s and their early 30s. So, I mean, it's a real problem. And I speak like anecdotally as well as, just the statistics as a whole prove that.
Yeah, and we're going to go over some statistics here just to kind of give kind of some backstory. I believe all of us at one point has or have had student loan debt. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. If you're willing to share, about how much do you currently owe?
Yeah, so I graduated college in December of 2010, and I had right at $29,000 in student loan debt. I was able to pay it off in about 3.5 years.
Oh, wow.
But the fact that I had the debt out there, it prevented me from doing a lot of the other things that I would have much rather spent my money on. Prevented me from being able to buy a house, prevented me from buying the vehicles I wanted to buy. Had to take on some roommates, live with some people to kind of share some living expense. So I think it definitely holds people back once they get out of school.
Sure. No, I completely agree. John, do you have any debt of the student
Well,
loan
I was
variety?
kind of different. Like, I switched around. I went to KC junior college first thing out of high school. And so due to a scholarship I had, that was free for 2 years. And I finished out my associates, and I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do. Had a general idea. But I went up to Eastern, and I accumulated about $11,000 in debt when all was said and done. And of that $11,000, I had saved up half of it, and the rest I borrowed from my parents and paid them back. So mine was a little different. Not everyone has that opportunity that I had. And I'm grateful for that, especially because of, I mean, I was working on the family farm at a very young age, and I was forced to save most of that money.
Yeah.
So just a little bit different situation than most people have.
Okay, but you've went to school and stuff like that, and you've probably been around people who have borrowed then.
Oh, without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And Jamie, what is your situation? I think
Hey, yeah.
I know
Speaking of people
pretty
he's been
much.
around that have borrowed. Hi, how are you? So, like you guys, I went to Eastern, and I'll just kind of explain the situation from start, and I think, why it became a situation. But so I didn't go to any junior college, went straight to Eastern, which is a 4-year. I think Eastern's what, about 18,000 a year, roughly.
Now it is, yeah.
Now I think when we were there it was
About
less,
11 or 12.
but yeah, I mean it's fairly low for a 4-year, and we were in state, so that helped too. But
Right, and that's on the low end of a 4-year. I think, like, my mindset was when I first went to college had nothing to do with loans, right? It's like, oh, you graduate high school, like, of course you go to college, or you're an idiot.
Yeah.
So, like, I went to college, and then I went there, didn't know what to do, didn't even go to college with a plan, right? Openly, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna take my gen eds for a year, like everybody else, kind of figure it out as I go, accumulate debt as I go. So long story short, after a couple like major changes and career changes, I ended up going to school for a total of like 5.5 years. So when it's all said and done, I had about like 80,000 in student loan debt.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I think it was even a little more than that. It was like 83 or 84,000 when it's all said and done. So.
And you're still paying that off, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah, I mean, I graduated 2 years ago. So definitely still paying it off. So we can go through that journey too, because I think, like, other than the stupidity of getting the student loan debt, I think there's better options than others of how to repay it.
Yeah,
but when that's the story all said and done, like 85. I think right now it's closer to 70. But again, I'm 26, 70,000 in the hole. Not a great way to start your living career, your career life, right?
Yeah. Would you say that you were, what's a good word I'm looking for, not as informed as you should have been by either your teachers or your parents or family about
Yeah,
the risks? Because I feel like that's a huge thing now. I think that is causing this crisis is just lack of education on how much school actually costs.
Well, I think that's a great point, and if obviously John and Carson could comment more on this, but I think as a lender, I think students are definitely taken advantage of. I don't think that people really realize, and whether that's a lack of education by family or the universities, it's probably a combination of both. I think that students are basically targeted and encouraged to take out these loans because that's what losers don't do. Losers don't go to school. People who are smart go to school, right?
Yeah, because that's what we were told. Like, hey,
So-
you need to go to school.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could comment on that a little bit. I think, I think we're brought up to think that college is our only option after high school, and like you said, you're kind of looked down upon in society if you don't go to college. The problem with it is, throughout high school, I think some of the teachers, I know at the school I attended, they kind of paint this overly rosy picture of you're going to go to college, then you're going to graduate, and you'll have your degree, and you're going to get out and get this great high-paying job. So, yeah, you may take on student debt, but you're going to be making so much money and have such a great job that it's not going to matter. You can take care of that debt. Like, it's no big deal. Mm-hmm. And I think that something that compounds that issue is the fact that they don't teach a lot of what I call life skills courses, in high school. We had one that kind of taught you how to balance a checkbook and some simple things like that. But I think as a whole, and John could probably agree with me on this, that the young people, especially that we see in the bank, are completely uneducated about how a loan works, how interest is calculated, the type of impact that it puts on your life. I don't think people realize, how much having debt out there can impact your ability to buy a home when you want to, or make other purchases that you would need a bank to finance traditionally. So I think it's just a matter of lack of education and people, painting an overly rosy picture of the situation.
Would you guys say that was more, who's more to blame for painting that rosy picture? Do you think it was your school? Was it your parents? Was it the recruiters that came in, or from the because I know like schools come into high schools and these recruiters are like, oh yeah, this school's great. It costs this. You can just take out a loan or get a scholarship.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say that they come in and say it costs this, but what kind of recruiter comes into a high school and talks costs? It's always like, oh, this is the options. This is the majors we have. This is what ranking we have. I think cost is kind of an afterthought in those types of things, and it shouldn't be, especially if you're going, for a career in sociology or something like that. You could pay $100,000 for a $40,000, if you're lucky, a year career. It's insanity, right?
I think you hit it on the head. That I can remember from when I was in high school, certainly weren't talking about cost so much as they were how good the football team was, or what kind of awesome homecoming parties and stuff they have. And I mean, they were definitely in on painting the rosy picture. And for me personally, I came from a home with two parents that neither one went to college. My dad worked in a factory, my mom worked retail, and from them, their standpoint was always that my sister and I should go to college to better ourselves and be better than what they were. So I don't know that it was purposely painting a rosier picture, but they certainly, put the thought in our heads that if we went to college, we would have a better life or better living than what they had.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the same situation with me. What about you, John? Did you have the same type of interactions?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, my parents were very debt conscious growing up. It was always, if you did not have the money to buy it cash outright, you probably didn't need it. I mean, they were so frugal with their money. The only debt they had was the home, and I know they both pinched their pennies and paid that off ASAP. So that was always in the back of my head. They were always a very debt-conscious family. But growing up, I mean, exactly like you guys said, recruiters don't tell you costs. That's not the main factor in the college you go to. It's the ranking, it's the sports teams, it's the education system. And I mean, it's just such a lack of information. And a lot of it too, I mean, graduating high school, you don't have the perspective of debt. You don't understand that, oh, I only make $20,000 or $30,000 a year starting out. You don't realize how big an impact a $200 monthly payment is going to be on your lifestyle.
$200 if you're lucky.
That's on the low end.
Do you want to know how much I pay a month in student loans?
On 80,000, yeah, I could guess.
I'm sure you could. Yeah.
Do you want to give us some perspective on the number?
Well, I can break it down for you. It's 4 different lenders.
Okay.
Well, 3 now. One of them's paid off. One of them was just Eastern. It was a Perkins loan. I think a lot of people are familiar with Perkins loans.
Yeah.
Just yeah. I mean, it's just from the school. There's a small amount. It's about 2,200. Paid that off as quick as I could, and then more significantly, I mean, one is Navient, huge lender, like one of the biggest, and the other one was Sally Mae.
Snake.
Sally
That's
Snake.
Sally the Snake is what I've heard. She's evil according to a lot of people, but yeah, continue.
Well, I mean, yeah, the Sally Mae, it's about, it's about 38,000. The monthly payment's about a little over $500 a month just for the Sally Mae.
Okay, so in total, how much a month are your payments?
About 800.
For 80,000. So
you're paying a house payment, and you don't have a house to show.
Oh, I have a house too.
Right.
So
I just mean you're paying another house payment. Yeah.
2 mortgages. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's a mortgage. That's the difference between a homeowner where you build equity and renting for the next decade or the next 15 years. This is real stuff that holds people back, and it's more than that though. It's not even homes. It's just having money to. It's stifling to the economy. It's the consumer debt. I think if you look at it compared to like the median wages over the since 1990, the wage increase is virtually flat when consumer debt is tripled.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think looking at this article from Forbes, it says student loan debt has now reached $1.5 trillion. It's second in the economy behind mortgage debt. It's surpassed credit cards and auto loans at this point, and that's of June 2018. So it's a huge deal.
It's insanity, and there's, I think, a bigger point on why these schools are just dishing these things out like hotcakes is because there's no risk in these loans. You can't default. You can't file for bankruptcy. These are for life. And if you die, guess what? They go to your next of kin. So as a lender, what's stopping you from targeting everyone you possibly can? Absolutely nothing.
Well, part of the issue, and I was just recently looking up a statistic on that as well. So looks like as of February 2018, only 20% of all the outstanding student loans are private, meaning held at private banks. The rest of it is either subsidized by the government or through the school directly or some other government function. I think part of the reason you see that is because, for one, the yield on these are unsecured loans, right? So while I can understand your aspect of saying that, why wouldn't you give out as many of these as you can? It is essentially an unsecured loan. There's nothing to repo. There's nothing to go back on. And they're typically put out there. Jamie, I don't know your particular situation or your loans, but I know it's not uncommon to see student loan debt amortized out for 10 years. And you typically don't start repayment until 6 months after graduation. So, from the bank standpoint, so just to give you a bit of a comparison, an unsecured debt with our bank, our maximum term on that would be 36 months. So we're not going out any longer than that, and we're getting anywhere from what, John?
Our unsecured rates are 11 to 13% right now, dependent on credit. So, and what's our yield on that? That's such a small margin that it's not beneficial for us because there's no recourse on it.
So, we're getting double the yield. It looks like here the national average interest rate on subsidized student loans anyway is 6.8%. So we're getting double that at our bank for unsecured debt. And
that's to minimize the risk on the bank, right? To charge the higher rate.
Well, higher risk, higher rate.
Yeah, higher risk, higher rate.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right, but where's the risk on student loans?
So I think part of the issue is, while you're correct in that they can't file bankruptcy on it, and that a lot of it actually can be passed down to the estate if you were to pass away. If we look back at that Forbes article that was quoted earlier, I'm trying to look here. They've got some statistics on the delinquency, and John and I were commenting on that earlier. So of the $1.5 trillion in debt, almost 11% of it is 90 days or greater past due. That is outrageously high.
10 times higher than the national bank average.
Yeah. Where you're talking.
Why is that allowed? Like, is it just because it's backed by the federal government that they're allowing this to be so delinquent, or what's
There's
causing
no
that
collateral.
high rate?
I think everybody's stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? The banks are trapped. What are they going to do? I mean, it's unsecured, so there's no collateral to repossess or go after. And if you don't pay them, they can attempt to sue you. But if you are a struggling fresh college graduate, you can't get blood out of a turnip either.
True. Yeah. Would they? I've heard in some instances, if you get government aid elsewhere, so like if you're close to retirement, they'll seize your Social Security benefits. They'll take from like your tax refund if you would get one. Like, is that true with student loans, or is that not the case?
Well, I can't comment for sure on the Social Security. That's
okay.
If that's the case, that's insanity. But this whole situation is insanity, right?
I got a little comment. I mean, I assume it's the same structure as consumer loans with banks. In order to garnish wages or seize assets, you would have to pursue a judgment. And on such a huge balance of consumer debt being unsecured like that, you're throwing money away by trying to pursue it. Because if they're unemployed, if they're working for cash, they don't have any tangible income for you to garnish. So, I mean, a lot of this debt is just not being pursued because it's not collectible.
It's not. Yeah, it's uncollectible debt, and that's part of the problem, I think, or that's part of the shift. I wish I had some more stats. I remember reading, this was a while back, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but a greater proportion of the overall student debt was private, and it's continuing to shrink each year because it is an uncollectible debt, and it does bring with it such high delinquency rates. So most private banks don't want to touch them at all. I know our bank, for instance, we won't do student loans.
Well, we have huge restrictions on being able to lend for student purposes.
Correct.
On top of that, too, I mean, how judgments work, how you could pursue that kind of collection. Judgment's good for 7 years. So they would have to pursue it, incur the legal expenses, get that judgment out there. Judgment's out there for 7 years. If that person never has a job or works cash, they're not probably going to have a big change in income in those 7 years. And then after those 7 years, that judgment lapses. So they would have to pursue a second judgment, which is only good for another 7 years. And after 2 judgments, you cannot file another one. So that's why the private sector is probably so low in student loan debt, is because of you don't have collectability options.
Okay. So it sounds like student loans are actually pretty risky, which is why the private sector is not a huge fan of lending these out, which is why the government's subsidizing these.
That's correct.
Who else is going to do it? Yeah,
it's true. So there's this
what's
talk
the solution?
I say that yeah, it's like there's talk of this huge bubble, and that it's going to pop. Like, what happens when these loans become too delinquent? Like, who's going to hurt the most when this bubble bursts up? Like, it's eventually it eventually has to do it, right?
I think you're going to end up seeing a similar situation in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, handling all the defaulted mortgages and mortgage-backed securities. I mean, it just the government's going to end up fronting the bill, and I don't know how we can do that.
Not with the increase in everything else.
The only other solution to this would be a surge in wages across the board, to where, when you did get out of college, you did land a job that was worth it, and you were able to repay that debt in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is. I think even us, like, we're millennials, quote unquote. I think it's becoming, when we first went to school, I don't remember hearing talks about this. I don't know if I just had my head in the sand, but I don't think it was talked about as much as it is today. I think that's the first step. I think when our generation starts to have kids in college, it's going to be a major pushback. There's going to be, we're already seeing more people go to community colleges.
Trade schools.
Trade schools. I think trade schools, for whatever reason, had a stigma of like, well, you're just not smart enough for college. I think that's idiotic. I'm sure most people who go to trade schools make more than the average person who goes to a 4-year university.
Absolutely, they do.
I've got some numbers on how much education affects salary.
Yeah, I'd be interested in those numbers.
You're not right. So,
okay.
College degrees do, on the average, increase wages or increase your salary on average for Americans. So let's see. The average salary with a high school diploma, median weekly earnings, $678. So that works out to be $35,000 a year on average. So that's just with a high school diploma. That's the average salary. With an associate's degree, that rises to $798 a week, which makes that an annual salary around $4,100 a year. And then with a bachelor's degree, that goes up even higher on average. You're earning $1,100 a week, making that about $60K a year. And then master's degrees, $1,300 a week, $70K a year. And then doctorates, $1,600 a week, annual $85 is the average. So as you get more education, your income does rise. It's in the numbers.
Right, but where's the trade school? That's the point I was trying to make.
Well, you have a direct correlation too. To get a master's, you're incurring debt, and to be a trade schools are so much cheaper, and you're immediately getting a decently income compared to less debt.
Yeah, I know a plumber straight out of school. You can make $50,000 with these. It's
my sister's boyfriend is a union welder, pipeline company, and he went to a 12-month trade school program for welding, and he got out. And he's making like $110,000 a year. So it just blows my mind. The guy went for 12 months to learn how to weld, and he's making 6 figures, Now, does he work all the time? Absolutely. And he works some cruddy hours and has to travel. I think that's a factor too. Whereas, John and I've got white collar jobs, and we're in an office 9 to 5 and weekends off and evenings off. So there's some other things to consider in there, but, it's crazy that someone can go to school for 12 months and make,
triple,
little or no debt, can make lots of money. No, there
Right.
are, and I'm surprised that wasn't, not to say that it wasn't, but I feel like when I was going through school that really wasn't, it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't like, oh, that's okay if you can't go to college. You can do this and be just as successful. I don't feel like that was encouraged.
Right. The ultimatum, my perception was, you either go to school, or what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I guess I'm going to school.
You're going to work minimum wage McDonald's jobs the rest of your life.
Well, I'm with you guys. I think the trade schools were not. I don't think that was encouraged. And again, I do think there was a stigma with that as well. Like you said before, that if you're at a trade school, it's because you weren't smart enough to go to a 4-year university. In practice, I think that's the opposite. I went to 4-year university with a lot of very uneducated people.
Half probably dropped out before they finished, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know that intelligence has anything to do with whether you attend a trade school or 4-year university, but it was certainly painted that way when we were younger.
Oh, sure.
I think part of it too was the generations prior. So I've got some interesting numbers on the cost of college education, average tuition over the past, let's see, this is a 40-year time span. So our parents, let's see, probably would have graduated mid to early 80s, maybe late 70s if your parents are older.
Fair.
So I'm gonna grab a year off this chart. I'm getting this from, what site is this? This is collegeboard.org. They have a spreadsheet of like the average cost of tuition. In 1980 and 81 school year, a 4-year public university, the average tuition was $2,380, with an average room and board per year of $7,800. So that was our parents' generation. So you could easily go to school, work part-time, full-time, and graduate from school with little or no debt. It was doable.
How much did you say was debt then?
How much was what?
How much was the debt? And then, sorry.
The debt?
Average debt.
Average debt. Let me get the number here. I think I had it.
I think nowadays it's 40,000, right?
Well, the average is
39, yeah.
30-ish, I think, is the average debt now. But I'm just talking straight to tuition costs.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry.
So this is just tuition costs. So that's very cheap. Now that has to be adjusted for inflation a little bit, but inflation doesn't catch up to the growth in cost. So let's go to 17 and 18. So last school year, average 4-year tuition per year was $9,970, with an average room and board of $20,000. So that is a percentage increase of, I can't even do the math here, but it's like quadrupled the cost, and it hasn't. And wages have stayed relatively, in terms of inflation, they've stayed relatively the same.
Right.
But the cost of education has tripled, so that's not helping matters either.
It's not just the cost of education; it's the cost of everything. Cost of general exponentially, and wages have remained essentially flat or static, like you said. So we're looking at some stats here. In $1 in 1980 had the equivalent buying power of $317 in 2018. Wow. So just outrageous inflation since 1980. A good example of this is our boss at the bank. I actually had a conversation with him about this. He got into banking in Salem in like 1983 or 4. Out of college from U of I. He was married, had 2 children. His wife wasn't working. He started at a bank here in Salem, a small community bank in Salem, and was able to buy a home that was 2 years old in the nicest, newest subdivision in town. Paid for he and his wife to live very comfortable lives, supported 2 children. Both had, 2 vehicles. So, I mean, he lived very comfortably with a starting wage in banking. And I think John and I could both attest that neither one of us would have been able to do that at all starting out.
Yeah, without a doubt, that wouldn't have been feasible.
John and I would both probably struggle now to buy. We couldn't. If we tried to buy, I couldn't afford to buy a home in the nicest neighborhood in Salem right now.
Yeah,
And I've been there 8 years now.
yeah,
So
and you guys live in a relatively cheap part of the country too.
yeah, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
houses by me, I live in the suburbs of Chicago. A 2,000 square foot home is probably $400,000.
Yeah, I
Sure.
mean, to
Yeah.
put it in context, I mean, even in I live in Swansea, Illinois. Even here, I just bought a little over 2,000 square foot house, 130,000,
Mhm.
Yeah,
and
that's
I can't
that's
imagine.
insane. I would
Uh,
literally I would that house would be sold in 10 seconds here. That is insanely cheap for
and
the
the
area
housing
that
market's
it's in.
hot right now too. It's hot,
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. So it
but
definitely matters where you're living, but yeah, in 1980, that was the norm, right? That was the
Yep.
husband had the main job, and you could have kids and a home and make a decent living on one income. That I
I
feel like
mean, yeah,
those days are gone now.
it wasn't uncommon for people going to school to just work their asses off in the summer, and that was enough for them to pay for a year of school.
Yeah.
Right.
Very common. Making, close to minimum wage, that was feasible in the 80s, even in the 80s. Right now, you wouldn't even be able to pay for, 10, 15% of your yearly student loan if you had a minimum wage job in the summer.
That might pay for your books.
It might, and that's rental. They're not even your books.
Well, it depends on the university, but yeah, you're completely right.
So something that I've noticed working at the bank, and it was kind of shocking to me. Growing up, I kind of thought that like you said, the minimum wage workers, the entry level positions at places, those were the people living paycheck to paycheck, and struggling a little bit. But that's not really the case. We've got a couple manufacturing facilities in Salem that pay really good wages for our area. And we see families where the husband and wife are both working there, making good money
And have been for
and
years.
struggling, or not necessarily struggling, but they're living paycheck to paycheck. They have no savings to speak of. They have no cash in the event of an emergency or, damage to their vehicle or their house and they need repairs. They don't have any excess money laying around. So that right there points out a serious problem to me that wages have got to increase or the cost of living has got to drop, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah, and just to piggyback more on that, I mean, if you look at living paycheck to paycheck, it's, these people, not only are they living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have a savings. They're not saving for retirement. So that becomes a government problem. If these people, I mean, that's why IRAs were invented. It's a tax break from the government to encourage retirement savings. And if these people aren't taking advantage of that, that burden falls back on the government. So it's compounding. I mean, not only are these people, and I say these people, I mean like our generation, these people, they're
Millennials.
not putting their money back into the economy. The economy is therefore stifling. It's kind of a vicious circle. And I mean, unless you have a great job, if the only excuse to have 100,000, and I'm speaking about me, only excuse to have 100,000 in debt is if you're a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, there's honestly no excuse. I mean, if I could go back in time, I am debating whether I'd go back to school at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. But I feel like there are even doctors and lawyers that have great jobs, but they have so much debt that they're even worse off than Joe Schmo working at McDonald's for $27,000 a year.
I have a friend. Yeah, I've got a friend that went to Logan Chiropractic School over Missouri,
Yeah,
and
I had a friend who went there too. Yeah.
yeah, he's a chiropractor. He's a doctor. He's a chiropractor, and he has more student loan debt than most of my other friends. I live in a nicer home than him. I drive nicer vehicle. I have a higher probably standard of living than he does, and he went to school longer than me and has 6 figures in student loan debt, and that's what's holding him back. And unfortunately, working in a small rural Midwestern town, he can't charge enough to repay that debt any faster. So what's that going to do? Is it going to force all of our good doctors and lawyers, other professionals into the cities to where they can make higher wages?
Yeah. But you also
Yeah.
have to keep in mind that, yeah, it's nice to have the job security and the higher wages, but your cost of living's higher. Your taxes are higher, and he's still got that debt. So
Right.
Yeah, and then that's exactly the people who you want with stifling debt to, the people, your doctors, the people who are supposed to be saving your life. I understand they make, very good salaries, but I mean, I'm not kidding. If you go to a good med school, it's not uncommon to have $500,000 in student loan debt.
Yep.
Oh yeah, definitely not uncommon.
They're just charging accordingly almost.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a and this is not primarily, I wouldn't say, but partly because it's government. It's this, they can charge pretty much whatever they want, and lack of education, lack of competition leads to where we are now. So where do we go from here, right?
And that was going to be my next question. What can we do, or what should we do, if anything, can we do to fix this? Like, is there a solution? Or
Absolutely. I think you start off at the school level. I think you educate people when they're in junior high and high school about things like loans, things like taking on debt, things like realistic expectations for salaries for jobs, and majors, and I think we need to cut the bullshit and quit telling people that they're going to get rich if they get a bachelor's degree in something.
Yeah,
because
agreed.
they're not, because everyone's got those now.
Right.
Yeah, there needs to be
That's right.
talks. There need to be talks in high schools. It's great. You can be whatever you want to be, if you're an idiot, right? I mean, what? You can't be a social worker. I mean, being a social worker is great. We need those people, but you can't expect to go to college. This great U of I, for instance, pay $40,000 a year to be a social worker. Go to a state school. Go to a community college to do that. It's like, come on, wake up.
Yeah, I think we need to get people back to reality. We got to quit playing in la la land and lying to ourselves that the only path after high school is a bachelor's degree. I think we need to tell people it's okay if you want to be a diesel mechanic. It's okay if you want to be a welder, if you want to be a boiler maker. I mean, those are great jobs. They pay well. And we need them. That's the other factor,
Yeah, the demand is so huge right now for trade jobs.
Yep. Yeah, we've kind of passed our .com boom. So, and
yeah, we passed the .com boom. We passed the housing crisis. What's next?
Student loans.
Student loans. Is there a solution that we can do in the interim? Because the educating the young people is great, but what about us? Well, we already know, but we're screwed. So, is there a way maybe the government can do something, or employers can do something to kind of mitigate the burden?
I mean, my answer to that is absolutely not. I mean, that's just kind of the perspective that I come from. I think less government has to do with my life, the better. And I think the less government has to do with anything, the better, including student loans. It sounds great. Like, yeah, free college. That sounds great. But nothing's free, right? I mean, you pay for that the rest of your life in taxes, and probably more. I mean, you need to make smart decisions about yourself, and if you're going to go to college, just make sure that it makes sense. Go for a degree that makes sense if you're going to have $50,000 in debt.
I think to expand on that is just better educating yourself to educate your children. So we're going to teach our children who are going to teach their children, etc. So government outside of the picture altogether. We need to learn how to manage the finances, teach our children, because you cannot expect teachers in rural Salem, Illinois or Southern Illinois to have the master's degree and be a financial advisor in order to be qualified to teach high school kids how to budget. I mean, that has to be taught at home. It's not feasible to teach.
Yeah, that, and it's just personal responsibility. I mean, I think when you graduate high school, you're an adult, but you're a child. You don't understand the concept of debt. You don't, and whether it's, I'm not making excuses, whether it's a lack of personal responsibility or a lack of education. That's just, I mean, speaking personally, that's where I came from. I didn't even know how much Eastern was a year. I had no idea.
I'm sure.
I had no clue.
I'm sure you're not the only one to say, I didn't really realize how much school was, because you're not paying for it then and there.
Well, not only that, I didn't give a shit. I didn't care how much it was.
Yeah, you didn't care how much $800 a month would be when you were done.
Well, we are an instant gratification society. We want our stuff now, and we'll pay for it later. Everything's going that way. People are financing 100% of their car. They want to finance 100% of their home. They want student loans so they can go to college and party with their buddies now, and they'll worry about that debt later. And unfortunately, we are reaping the benefits of that mindset.
No, it's incredibly true. I just hope that we can somehow weather the storm and it doesn't become another 2008,
No, I don't. I think it's different in a lot of ways than 2008. I don't know if I necessarily believe there's a student loan bubble, quote unquote.
Okay.
But I think it is stifling on the economy. I mean, it's not going to be as hard hitting as the mortgage crisis, just because of the subprime loan. I mean, that was just criminal. Let's be honest, it was criminal.
Yeah.
There's nothing criminal per se about this. I mean, it's going to be stifling for decades.
It's a lack of education. It's not criminal. It's just lack of education.
Right.
Do you guys think that universities have unwarrantedly taken advantage and just raise their tuition because they know that?
Look, a university is a for-profit business like everybody else. Absolutely, they're going to take advantage. And I definitely think they did. But do I blame them? No. I'm a capitalist, so I think good for them. I would have done the same thing.
Because the government, they enabled them, in my opinion. They're like, we'll just give loans to 18-year-olds, no problem. Here, you can charge whatever you want. We'll give them this money and
just pay for it later.
Yeah, these idiots will pay whatever you want. Hire another administrator that does nothing. It's fine. We've got another 5,000 students coming this year, paying $40,000 a year.
Exactly. And now enrollment's down more than ever. So screw you, buddy. There's
a major pushback against this. The word's out. I mean, I would be curious too if we had like a high schooler on this podcast, if he knew what we're talking about. I think that would be, man, I'd be so happy if you're like, yeah, I know, like I agree.
That would be very telling. I really don't have a pulse on that anymore. But that would be interesting to see if like the next generation of college students, if they're aware of this. That's a really good point.
Yeah. And I think it's important, just like, the points, maybe I can speak for you guys too. Like the points we're trying to make is not to not go to college, but it's just to know what the hell you want to do and the impacts of that before you actually do it.
Yeah.
Whether that's trade school, 4-year degree, entrepreneurship.
Stay home.
Yes, and save. I mean, save before you go. Have some money set aside to lessen the blow a little bit. And like you said, you can't rack up 6 figures in student loan debt and be a social worker. I mean, it just doesn't pair up. I think people need to be realistic with their expectations. If you want to be a social worker, that's fine, but I think they need to go into it with the understanding that they're probably going to be in a rough spot financially for a long time if they do so.
Yeah, and by the way, no judgment here. I'm a psychology degree, and I haven't used my degree whatsoever. I'm in finance. Like, so I feel like I can speak on these things just as well as anybody can about worthless degrees, quote unquote.
Yeah,
It's,
I mean, I think 3 out of the 4 of us are doing things that we did not go to school for. Carson, did you go to school for what you're doing now, though?
Well, I started out in mechanical engineering, but
Okay.
I found that to be really boring, so I went into a just slightly more exciting field of finance.
segue to banking.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, you got a psychology degree. I got sports management. John,
Finance in a year and a half.
yeah, say like you're in the process. So like you kind of did the smart thing. You like got the job, and then the employer's like, hey, you should get this.
Yeah, but
and
that
we'll
was
help you.
total sheer luck. I mean, not sheer luck, but don't bank on that. Don't bank on your golden egg.
Well, I mean, if it was 30 years ago, employers would be a lot more willing to do that, but employers don't do that.
Exactly.
And anymore, like pay for your school or give you a pension. Like that's another topic for another day. But yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, there's so many segues from this topic. It's unbelievable, but
yeah. Well, guys, we're approaching an hour. So I usually try and keep it around 60 minutes, but I think we had a really good discussion on this student loan crisis. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to touch on or go over before we sign out?
The only thing that I hadn't mentioned that I kind of want to bring up and show that one of the ancillary effects that I think we're seeing from this is sheerly my opinion. I don't have any stats to back this up, but I would probably argue that the slower pace for the recovery from our last recession is in part due to the fact that so many people are going to school and so many people are taking on this student loan debt. I think John had looked up earlier that, John, do you remember the stats on how many college graduates are moving back home with their parents as opposed to going out and being, buying homes, buying cars, and building the economy? They're just going back and living at home because they can't afford to do anything else.
As of it was CNBC that had this statistic. It was 32.2 was moving back home with one or both of their parents. It depended on the family, obviously. 31%, so just barely lower, had either a spouse or some kind of partner that they were moving in with. And it was all the way down to 14% was either living on their own after high school or they were trying to find a roommate in order to cover the cost of living. So just huge switches there.
It's stifling on the economy, and it's making recovery harder. As everyone knows, the economy is a cyclical thing, and we're going to have good times and bad times, but it's going to take us a lot longer to recover from these bad times if this debt level keeps increasing.
Yeah.
Very well said. There's one other thing that I think I wanted to bring up. This is just my personal feelings here. Is that, does it bother you guys that the boomer generation or the generation after that, so our parents, depending on where they fall, does it bother you when we hear things like, oh, millennials are lazy, like they should just work harder, when I feel like this whole podcast just kind of reaffirms that, like, no, we're not. Like, we just have different circumstances.
No, I think that stereotype. I work with millennials, and I can tell you, I mean, we work 10 to 12 hours a day. I mean, it's some of the hardest working people I've ever been around.
Mhm.
Granted, I don't work around a lot of the baby boomers, but at least the people that I'm working with, no, I mean, it's a total myth.
I think you're talking about two different types of work,
Yeah.
right? More of us have office related jobs, or what I would consider traditionally white collar jobs.
Yeah.
The boomers were traditionally blue collar workers. They were out digging ditches, they were working factories, they were hands on. So physically being wore out is very different from mentally. And I think a lot of the white collar jobs are, they provide some mental exhaustion. So I don't know if you're even making a fair comparison there. I think,
Okay.
could be apples and oranges.
I don't take offense to it because exactly like everyone else has said, it's just apples and oranges. If they really think that, they would tell me to my face that they think I'm lazy. If they're just generalizing to the
Sure.
millennials, who
Yeah.
cares? I'm not them.
Look,
I am, but I'm not.
every generation has some lazy bums, millennials included. Come on, they had the hippies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's
Lazy.
compare. I'd love to. I mean, I think millennials probably work more hours. I have no statistical evidence. It's all anecdotal. But what a crock of shit that is. I mean, yeah, we have some loonies who think there's 48 genders, but that's a different topic for a different time.
Who knows? We might bring that up on a future episode. But guys, I think we're gonna sign out of here. I just want to thank Carson. Thank you for coming on. I know we're all busy people and it was hard getting on, but I appreciate you guys coming on. And if you guys are watching or listening, and if you have a comment or if you think that we're just complete idiots, just let us know, and we'll start a meaningful discussion. But guys, I think that's it. And then thank you so much for coming on, like I said, and this has been another episode of Trivial Objections.